Alright, if you follow Laravel, then I believe you are quite excited about all the shiny new announcement in last Laracon US. I will talk about this new thing soon in this channel, but today I'm going to talk about a core PHP feature. So before jumping into the feature or solution I'm talking about, let me explain the problem at first. I have a very simple API endpoint which is called sum. This sum endpoint is being handled by sum controller. This is a very simple controller, and this is an invocable controller, which means in the invoke method we are getting two numbers, number 1 and number 2, from the query parameter, and then we are passing these two parameters to our sum method, and this sum method is basically returning the summation of these two numbers. Very simple, right? So now let's see what can be the possible problem with this code. Let's go to the browser, and in the browser let me call API sum number 1 number 2, where the number 1 is 20 and number 2 is 21. I expect it will return sum 41, which is correct. If I change it to something else like 23, then it will give me 43, which is also correct. The problem with this code is very simple. If you just try something like non-integer, let's say 13.5 and here 20.5, the summation of these two numbers should be 44, but it is giving us 43. Why? The answer is also very simple, because here we are getting 20.5 and 23.5, and we are passing these two numbers here in the sum method, but the sum method is saying that I only expect integer. So here what is PHP doing? We are passing number 1 and number 2, both of this number contains decimal point, and then when we pass these two numbers with decimal point in a function that accept only integer, PHP is casting those numbers with decimal point into integer. So PHP does this cast by itself. We don't have to cast it. I mean, it's okay for many cases. For example, if you pass only integer like 20 and 23, then it is giving us the correct result. But if you pass any decimal point, it doesn't give you the correct result. So if you really expect that if someone pass a floating point in a number, then I won't expect that PHP should throw an error. I mean, in many cases, you might not notice that your program has a bug because someone is passing a floating point value in a function that only accepts integer. Even though we have type hinted that it should only expect integer, but it's still expecting floating point value. We don't want that. So in this sort of case, what you can do is you can simply add this declare strict types 1, which means we are saying that the type should be very strict. If someone pass something else in integer, if someone pass float value, then it will give us an error. For example, if we rerun this code, it will give us an error and saying that must be type integer string given, which means if we get the data from our query parameter, it will always be a string, right? It doesn't know about this query parameter whether it is a string or integer, so we need to typecast explicitly. For example, here we need to say that it is an integer, and then here we need to say that it is an integer. So now it will work fine. So now you know what you are doing, which means if someone gives a string with a float value, you are converting it to integer. You are well aware of that, and then you are passing that integer to our summation method. There are two things you need to be careful about these sort of things. For example, if I say it should be a float, and I say the number 2 should be a float, and return would be float, but if we pass something like 23, then it will still work, or let's say 22, it will still work. But even though 22 is not a float value, it is being converted to float. What if we convert it to integer? As you can see, we can still pass number 2 to a float parameter. For example, if we rerun the code, it still works. So we are saying that we are passing an integer value to a float data type. This is an intentional exception. So if a number is an integer, we can still pass that integer to a float parameter, but it is not true for the other way around. And another thing you need to consider is, let's say we move this sum function to a different trait. Let's say I made a trait can sum, and then I move this function to can sum trait. I will define it as a trait, and then I am using this can sum trait. So this can sum will be called from here. Now you might think the function is in CANSUM, right? So let's move this declare strict in CANSUM and then we are good. So every code that calls this CANSUM will have this strict type declared, right? But no, this is not the case. For example, if we make this integer again and int again, and then we pass a float value here, so let's say 22.5, it is still not complaining. For example, if we just see what is the value of number 2, the value of number 2 is 22.5. We are casting it to float and we are passing that float value to our sum. But that should not accept the float value, right? But in this case, it is accepting. Why? Because this declare strict is only considered in the file itself, not in a different file. In this file, we are violating the rule. For example, we are passing the float value to an integer. In this file, the CANSUM file, we are not doing that violation of rule. So we need to declare these strict types everywhere, especially wherever you are doing this. Now it is saying we cannot pass float to an integer parameter. So that was it about this strict type. It is a very small thing in PHP, but I think it is very crucial. Especially sometime if you overlook this, you might see some really weird bug that is very difficult to find. So I would highly recommend that you use this strict type everywhere in your code. So whenever you are passing a value to a function, you exactly know what you are passing. And if you pass a different data type, then the compiler will tell you that you are doing it wrong. So you can catch the bug earlier. That's pretty much it for today. It was a short video, but I will talk about the new changes in Laravel ecosystem soon. Stay tuned. See you in the next one. Happy coding.